Sadashivrao Bhau. Sadashivrao Peshwa, 3 August 1730 – 14 January 1761, was son of Chimaji Appa, younger brother of Bajirao I and Rakhmabai Pethe family, and the nephew of Bajirao Peshwa. He was a finance minister during the reign of Maratha Emperor Chhatrapati Rajaram II. He served as the Sardar Senapati commander-in-chief of the Maratha army at the Third Battle of Panipat. Early life. Sadashivrao was born at Satara in a Brahmin family. He was the son of Peshwa Bajirao's brother Chimaji Appa. His mother Rakhmabai died when he was barely a month old. His father died when he was 10 years old. He was cared by his grandmother Rakhmabai and his aunt Khanjapura. He was very bright from early years. He was educated in Satara. His tutor was Ramchandra Baba Shenvi. Nanasaheb Bajirao stayed in Satara though he had become Peshwa. Sadashivrao undertook his first campaign in Karnataka in 1746 because Babuji Naik of Baramati and Fate Singh Bansal of Akalkot failed in the task assigned to them. Sadashivrao left Satara on 5 December 1746 with a force of 20,000. He also joined Mahadoba Purandare and Sakaram Bapu as his political advisors. The campaign continued till May 1747, mostly in the western Karnataka region. In January 1747, he won his first battle at Adra, south of Khanjapura. The Nawab of Sabner was chastised, the fort of Bahadur Benda was reduced, and chaff was levied from the region between the rivers Krishna and Tungabhadra. Altogether 36 parganas were captured in this campaign. Sadashivrao's first military achievement was in 1760 in Karnataka region with Mahajipant Purandare and Sakaram Bapu Bakal serving as advisors and commanders under him. He conquered from the Nawab of Savanur and subsequently annexed the cities of Kittur, Paraskad, Kakek Yadwad, Bagalkot, Adami, Navalgund, Umbal, Jiri, Torgal, Halil, Harihar, and Basavapatna. He crushed the revolt of Yamaji Shivdev. Mahajipant Purandare was Dewan of Peshwa during that period. Sadashivrao was Dewan of Bhosale of Nagpur. After the death of Chhatrapati Shahu, Ramchandra Baba Shenvi suggested to Sadashivrao to take Peshwai of Khanjapura, but Nanasaheb Peshwa opposed this idea. Mahajipant Purandare resigned and Sadashivrao became the Dewan of Peshwa. He successfully led the Battle of Ajir, which weakened the Nizam of Hyderabad. He won the fort of Daulatabad. The news of Ahmad Shah Abdali's march towards Delhi and the subsequent death of Dattaji Scindia at the Battle of Burarigat had arrived. Therefore Sadashivrao was called back from Ajir to Parchur, where the council of war was held. It was decided that Sadashivrao would go north to resist the Afghans. Third Battle of Panapat. In January 1760, news reached the Prime Minister Nanasaheb Peshwa that Ahmad Shah Durrani, better known as Ahmad Shah Abdali, had invaded and captured the Punjab region. Abdali had formed an alliance against the Marathas with other Rohilla chieftains, principally Najib-ul-Dawla and the Nawab of Awadh Shuja-ud-Dawla. Abdali recruited Afghans displaced by the war. Nanasaheb Peshwa was then at the zenith of his power, having defeated the Nizam at Ajir. He chose Sadashivrao to lead the Maratha army to Delhi. Unlike Malharao, Holkar, and Raghunath Rao, both of whom had deep knowledge of northern India, Sadashivrao was unfamiliar with the personages and politics of the region. This was to prove costly, as he mishandled the regional kings and failed to form alliances with them. The main reason for the failure of the Marathas was that they went to war without good allies. An army of between 45,000 and 60,000 was gathered and started its northward journey from Patur, modern Parchur, on 14 March 1760. It was accompanied by roughly 100,000 non-combatants, including family members, and a large number of pilgrims desirous of making pilgrimages to Hindu holy sites in northern India, as they felt safe in the presence of the Maratha forces of Holkar and Scindia joined the army on the way. Sadashivrao was responsible for successfully adjusting the hit-and-run tactics used by the Maratha cavalry, as these tactics were ill-suited for the Western-style heavy artillery and infantry that he had learnt from the French. These changes had resulted in several victories for the army, such as in Ajir. However, some of the Maratha generals, like Holkar, were not ready to adopt the new strategy completely and pointed out that the new units of artillery and infantry were not compatible with the other forces in the army, and that the general, despite the reservations of his generals and a shortage of time and money, Bhau formed a unit consisting of 10,000 infantry and 50 artillery pieces. Holkar and Scindia tried to persuade Bhau to strike diplomatic ties with Maharaja Surajmal Jat of Barakpur and the Rajputs, Sikhs, Shuja-ud-Dawla, and Muslim leaders in North India. However, the Rajputs refused to support the Marathas, citing unjust tribute from Rajputana and interference in the internal and political matters of Rajputana. Therefore, the Rajputs wanted to keep the Marathas away from at least the Rajputana. In 1748, the Marathas had interfered in succession of Jaipur kingdom, trying to install the younger son as the king in place of the eldest son, but the Maratha army under Malhara Holkar had been checked by Maharaja Surajmal in 1704. Therefore, both Holkar and Scindia knew Surajmal's strength and realized that an alliance with him was essential to win the coming war with Abdali. Despite the fact that Surajmal had killed Holkar's son in a battle, Scindia requested Surajmal to come to Agra to meet Sadashivrao Bhau for a greater cause, though Surajmal did not trust Bhau. Both Holkar and Scindia gave their word of honour to Surajmal for his personal safety while persuading him to come to the Bhau's camp. Surajmal agreed to join the Maratha forces to defeat the foreign invader from Afghanistan. Previous victories with artillery had made Bhau overconfident. Bhau was a man of strong character. He did not seek cooperation of the Jat and Rajput kings while planning for the war with Abdali, but rather planned to punish them later to try to subjugate them. This led to their non-cooperation and an acute shortage of supplies. He did not heed the sound advice of Maharaja Surajmal, who held power around Delhi and Agra, to leave the civilians at Agra and take only soldiers to the battlefield, though there was a severe shortage of food and other supplies. This proved fatal on the fateful day of the final battle, as the food finished and the starved soldiers and horses could not fight properly, and a desperate Bhau had to order an attack. The Jats did not support the Marathas. The overbearing attitude of the Bhau when he met the regional kings at Agra worsened the matters. The Bhau failed to forge an alliance with the Jats, though they held sway on the food supplies around Delhi. In fact, Bhau decided to arrest Maharaja Surajmal, but Holkar and Scindia, who had given their word of honour to Surajmal while persuading him to come to the Bhau's camp, tipped off Surajmal at night, and he left just after midnight. Bhau sent his men after him in the morning, but Raja Surajmal and his men had reached the safety of Balabgar fort by then, and Bhau's men returned empty-handed. Bhau also spurned the offer from the Sikhs for alliance, though his commanders tried to persuade him. Therefore he did not get any supplies from Punjab. Thus, inability to anticipate the food supplies of his army and inability to forge alliances was major cause of defeat in the Battle of Panipat. The slow-moving Maratha camp finally reached Delhi on 1 August 1760, and took the city the next day in a battle in which artillery units were crucial in destroying the fortifications of Durrani's forces. However, Bhau found only a little supplies in Delhi for his forces. The supplies from the region immediately around west and south of Delhi had dried up, as Bhau had antagonized the regional rulers. Therefore, Bhau moved about 110 km 68 mi north of Delhi to Karnal, which is further north of Panipat, and captured the fortified village of Khanjapura, about 10 km 6.2 mi northeast of Karnal on the west. The entire garrison of Durrani was killed. Durrani had earlier crossed the Yamuna River and was on its east bank. The river was swollen in flood and could not be crossed. Durrani watched helplessly from the east bank of the river and could do nothing to save his garrison and the Khanjapura fort on the west bank of the river. The Marathas achieved a rather easy victory at Khanjapura, although there was a substantial Afghan army posted there. Some of Abdali's best generals were killed. Ahmad Shah was encamped on the left bank of the Yamuna River, which was swollen by rains, and was powerless to aid the garrison. However, the supplies that Bhau got at Khanjapura lasted only a few weeks, as there was a large number of non-combatants in his camp. The massacre of the Khanjapura garrison, within sight of the Durrani camp, exasperated Durrani to such an extent that he ordered crossing of the river at all costs. Ahmed Shah and his allies on 17 October 1760 broke up from Shahadura, marching north. Taking a calculated risk, Abdali daringly plunged into the river, followed by his bodyguards and troops. Between 23 and 25 October 1760, they were able to cross at Bagpat, a small town midway between Delhi and Panipat on the east bank of Yamuna, as a man from the village, in exchange for money, showed Abdali a way through Yamuna, from where the river could be crossed unopposed by the Marathas, who were still preoccupied with the sacking. After the Marathas failed to prevent Abdali's forces from crossing the Yamuna River, they set up defensive works in the ground near Panipat, thereby blocking his access back to Afghanistan, just as his forces blocked their access back towards Delhi. However, on the afternoon of 26 October, Ahmad Shah's advance guard reached Samalkha, about halfway between Sanapat and Panipat, where they encountered the vanguard of the Marathas. A fierce skirmish ensued, in which the Afghans lost 1,000 men killed and wounded, but drove the Marathas back to their main body, which kept retreating slowly for several days. This led to the partial encirclement of the Maratha army. In skirmishes that followed, Govind Pant Bundell, with 10,000 light cavalry, who weren't formally trained soldiers, was on a foraging mission with about 500 men to gather supplies. They were surprised by an Afghan force near Meerut, and in the ensuing fight Bundell was killed. This was followed by the loss of another 2,000 Maratha soldiers who were delivering the army's payroll from Delhi. This completed the encirclement, as Ahmad Shah had cut off the Maratha army's supply lines. With supplies and stores dwindling, tensions rose in the Maratha camp as the mercenaries in their army were complaining about not being paid. Initially, the Marathas moved in almost 150 pieces of modern long-range, French-made artillery, with a range of several kilometers. These guns were some of the best of the time. The Marathas' plan was to lure the Afghan army to confront them while they had close artillery support. By November 1760, Durrani managed to have 45,000 soldiers to block Maratha passage to the south towards Delhi. Durrani thereafter gradually isolated the Marathas financially and cut off their meagre supplies from their base in Delhi. This eventually turned into a 2-month-long siege led by Abdali against the Marathas in the town of Panipat. During the siege, both sides tried to cut off the other's supplies. At this, the Afghans were considerably more effective, so that by the end of November 1760 they had cut off almost all food supplies into the besieged Maratha camp, which had about 100,000 non-combatants. According to all the chronicles of the time, food in the Maratha camp ran out by late December or early January, and cattle died by the thousands. Reports of soldiers dying of starvation began to be heard in early January. Durrani had noted the huge number of non-combatants following Bhau's army and ordered an attack on their camp, slaughtering large numbers of civilians and soldiers' families. The resulting casualties and refugees fleeing to the Maratha camp caused overcrowding, supply shortages, and shook the morale of Bhau's army, forcing him to turn his attention to safely transporting the civilians to Pune. In January 1761, Bhau had faced famine and was blocked reinforcement due to Durrani's control of key transportation routes. On 13 January 1761, the Maratha chiefs begged their commander Sadashivrao Bhau to be allowed to die in battle than perish by starvation. The next day the Marathas left their camp before dawn and marched south towards the Afghan camp. The two armies came face to face around 8:00 a.m. on 14 January 1761, the Makar Sankranti day, and the battle raged until evening. Finally, the Marathas, who were on the verge of starvation, made a bold effort to break the blockade and issued forth to battle. The attack on Durrani was fierce, and his wazir was found sitting on the ground eating mud and telling his fleeing soldiers that Kabul is far off. The battle was in the favor of Marathas till about 2 p.m. when a stray bullet hit Vishwasrao, and Durrani managed to throw in 10,000 troops, who had fled the battlefield along with fresh 500 slave troops that guarded him. Bosaheb was surrounded along with Jankoji Scindia and Ibrahim Gardi, while Malhar Rao Holkar managed to slip away. Fighting to the last man, Bosaheb perished in battle. Sadashivrao Bhau along with Ibrahim Khan Gardi had planned and were executing a battle strategy to pulverize the enemy formations with cannon fire and not to employ his cavalry until the Afghans were thoroughly softened up. With the Afghans now broken, he would move camp in a defensive formation towards Delhi, where they were assured supplies. But some Maratha generals overacted while some left battlefield, leaving their defences open, resulting in the defeat of the Marathas. Durrani was taken unaware by the early morning attack and decided to counter-attack during daylight. Durrani faced heavy initial losses. A stray bullet hit Vishwasrao, Bhau's nephew and heir to Nanasaheb Peshwa, and he died on the spot. Bhau departed the battlefield to visit the corpse and plunged into the Afghan army. Vishwasrao's death had a devastating effect on the morale of his troops. Durrani attacked to take advantage of the confusion and weakness of Bhau's forces. Bhau counter-attacked, but ultimately the army was defeated, and any remaining civilians were massacred. Death. Bhau, on seeing the demise of his beloved Vishwasrao, Bosaheb came down from his elephant, climbed on a horse and plunged into the enemy lines without realizing the consequences. Seeing his empty howdah, his troops thought that he had fallen and that they were leaderless, and caused confusion. However, Bhau didn't leave the battlefield and was killed. His headless body was found in the heap of dead bodies 3 days after the battle. It was identified by the Maratha vakil who were with the camp of left Marathas with Kasharaj Pandit, the wazir of Shuja-ud-Dawla. Bhau's body was cremated with all rituals. The next day, his head was found, which was kept hidden by an Afghan soldier. It was cremated and the ashes taken for Visarjan to Kashi Vishwas Patil, Kasharaj Pandit Bakar. Establishment of artillery units. While observing several battles, Bhau witnessed the effectiveness artillery and lightweight guns mounted on British ships and began incorporating artillery units in the army of Bajirao. Bhau enlisted the services of Ibrahim Khan Gardi, who brought with him 2,500 trained soldiers and 15 cannons. Bhau also employed European mercenaries who used to be in the employ of Tulaji Anger before his defeat. Notable among them was an engineer named Le Corbusier, who was an expert in foundry and in handling explosives. Within 2 years, Bajirao's infantry artillery division had 10,000 men and 56 guns. Family. His first wife's name was Umabai. She gave birth to 2 sons who died as soon. Umabai died in 1750. Sadashivrao's second wife was Parvatibai. She accompanied Sadashivrao Bhau during the Battle of Panipat. Sadashivrao is supposed to have died in the Battle of Panipat. Parvatibai refused to accept that her husband was dead and did not live a widow's life. Around 1770, a person appeared in Pune claiming to be Sadashivrao. He was soon busted and is known as Totaya Tataya, which means an impostor. An area of Pune is named Sadashiv. In popular culture, in 1994 Hindi TV series The Great Maratha, Bhau's character was portrayed by Pankaj Dheer. In 2014 Marathi film Rama Madhav, Bhau was portrayed by Amal Kaul. In 2019 Hindi film Panapat, he was portrayed by Arjun Kapoor. In 2019 Marathi TV series Swamini, he was portrayed by Abhishek Rahalkar. Sakal Raj Karyat Urandhar Sadashivrao Bhau, book by Kaustubh Castor in Marathi.